I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. We're just a few minutes after our time, so hopefully we are good to go. All right, so I'm going to get started on a little presentation sort of discussing careers in music, factors in getting positions, the job, if you will, understanding next steps on after graduating college, or even just as you're going into that professional realm. I think the most important thing that we need to sort of question is why we want to make a living doing music, what is important to us. But with that being said, hopefully those questions are answered sort of prior to going into this field. And you can actually be thinking more so about pragmatic sort of tips and protocols and things along those lines that make sense for you within whatever your realm is. So I wasn't trying to parse this discussion or parse this topic in any way that is anything other than what might fit for you. So it's not about my own career. However, I did want to sort of cover just a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me and or who might not understand sort of what I've done with my own career through the years, to give you just a little bit of background to sort of give you why I may have a little bit of feelings on certain things or why I may look at things in a certain way. So my past experiences have sort of informed where I currently am. So where I currently am is as artist teacher of saxophone at Roosevelt University Chicago College of Performing Arts. And I am also the director of marketing for the NASA organization and also the head of woodwinds at the Chicago College of Performing Arts. I'm in my 5th year now, finishing out my 5th year of teaching at Roosevelt. And it's hard to believe that this is my, I believe, 11th or 12th year now at the collegiate realm of teaching. So I'm very proud of that fact. And I'm also very humbled to sort of get to work with students from around the world and around the country, shaping their careers and sort of being involved in their lives in that way. I see a few past students kind of on the screen here that are sort of blinking at me right now. My past experiences, coming straight out of grad school, basically out of my doctorate, I did my doctorate at the University of Illinois with Deborah Richtmeyer, who was an absolute master at helping me understand sort of traversing this crazy life that I now have and this wonderful life that I now have. But shortly after finishing my coursework for the doctorate, I was fortunate enough to start part-time working for the Van Doren Corporation. I started using the reeds and mouthpieces, and it seemed like a really good fit for me to actually work with that organization. That informed me in many ways of things I'm going to be talking about networking and skill sets that I think are really important in getting that job. But that was one of those things that really helped me understand and shaped me. From there, I actually became the director of marketing, product marketing for saxophones at the Conn-Selmer organization, and worked with Selmer Paris and Yamasawa and all of those really famous brands, sort of helping shepherd them into the marketplace, but also working with artists, again, working with many artists from around the world and around the country. Then I went from there and I actually joined the faculty at the University of Illinois, and I got to co-teach and was sort of able to be re-mentored, if you will, by my now colleague, Deborah Richtmeyer at the University of Illinois. And many of my colleagues there sort of helped me understand what the first years of collegiate teaching were all about. And along with that, then moved to the College of Worcester and then worked also with the University of Notre Dame. From there, went to Chicago College of Performing Arts, where I currently now am, and also had a chance to also be the assistant dean while I was there. So I've worn a few different hats, not only as a performer and as a teacher, but also as a music industry person and also as an administrator. So I sort of have seen many different sort of layers inside of this career. And I think that's what's helpful for me to now look back and kind of take a look at what my thoughts are that sort of led me to where I currently sit and what I think works within the realm of music. So these are just some of my own personal sort of feelings. So the first thing is thinking about the do's and do nots of putting yourself out there. So what are the first steps in thinking about how we begin that kind of process of putting ourselves into the world, whether it be applying for a job, whether it be networking, whatever it may be. But the do's we're going to cover first. So these are the kind of the first steps. So the first thing that I think is really important And I will say a lot of the information that I'm covering today is a smattering of information that has worked for myself that I have found, information I have found, resources that I have read, things that I have come across, and also just utilizing people in my life that have helped me understand what makes sense for my own students and for myself. So the first one is building relationships. But I think with building a relationship, it's also showing that you care. It can't be one-sided. You need to have real interest in what people like and what they have to say. It goes a really long way to help understand how you can be involved in kind of their ecosystem, how you can be involved in their system, how you're involved in their network. It's not gained overnight. None of this is gained overnight. It takes time, and just because you have a college degree doesn't make it so that you're instantaneously going to go out into the field and have a job. So it's really on you at that point to start knocking on doors and start building those relationships and start taking time to make sure you're investing in people. But I think part of that as well, and I just want to reiterate this as much as I possibly can, to also show them that you care. It cannot be one-sided. The next thing that I think is really important is to show respect even when you disagree. And it's an interesting statement to make, in particular with our sort of political ecosystem that we're in the United States. I'm not going to make any political sort of commentary beyond that, but I think you can probably understand what I'm saying, where it's imperative, I think in particular in the arts, but it is such a small community. You know, we talk about 6 degrees of separation. We talk about how we're all interconnected in some ways. Well, I don't think in the saxophone world, it's really 6 degrees of separation. I didn't personally study with Marcel Mule, but I studied with Fred Hemke, and Fred Hemke studied with Marcel Mule. So it's a very fine line between individuals that connects all of us through different various threads. When you have disagreements with other individuals, though, or when you may not agree with them completely, it's imperative that you do so in a way that is still showing them that you have respect for them. And so I think showing respect even when you may not completely agree with what they're saying, completely agree with what's going on, you can still have discourse done in a kind way. The other thing that I think when putting oneself out there, that's a really important factor so that you can just always take this into consideration, because we live in a climate of social media. We live in a world right now of Zoom and Skype and FaceTime and all of these sort of things. Anytime you put yourself out there, there's an online footprint that you now have. So any comment that you have through posts, online interactions, they can potentially reflect you and your brand. They can potentially reflect who you are, or at least come across as reflecting who you are. So anytime you're doing so in any sort of way that there may be some sort of political or any type of online footprint for you, make sure that you're doing so in a professional manner. It's key to always make sure that we have an awareness of those who are paying attention to us, and how we go about that now because of social media, because of YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those sort of things. They all have longevity to them. And so we have to assume that they sort of live on in perpetuity. And I think it's just very important to remind ourselves that when putting yourself out there, however you're doing so, that we do so in a professional manner, and that you are going to be willing to back up whatever you've put out there, because it will live online. The next things that I think are really key, be a giver and not just a taker. So what do I mean by that? The world's not all about giving and taking. It's about sharing resources. It's about information that'll be beneficial. It's about networking. It's about sharing that with other people. Nate Nab is doing such a beautiful job for us all right now, but with giving us a platform to actually share with each other and come together in a way that I think is really kind of wonderful. It makes you almost second guess and question why we haven't done these sort of things before. But through all of everything that's going on in the world right now, I'm glad that these kind of things are happening. I'm glad that people are partaking in this information, but reminding ourselves that when you're getting information, we're also needing giving back. My way of giving back may be different than other individuals, but we all have to continue to sort of do so. And that is something that does lead towards potential opportunities in the future. Who knows where it will lead to? The next one is to be honest. It sounds like a simple sort of little thing to say, but there's a lot of people who sort of misrepresent themselves. Some may say swindling. You just need to make sure that any time that you have any sort of interaction with other people, that the business is part of it, but honesty is a big part of that as well. You need to be able to live behind those words. And if you say you can do something, if I say I can come in and play a performance and I can't back it up, I probably wasn't honest about it at that point in time. So make sure that that honesty is always a part of it. I tell my students all the time that it's imperative that when you go in and when you do something, you put your best foot forward. And I think that that honesty, not only with yourself and how you present yourself, but honesty in your own playing level and where you are as a saxophonist or any musician for that matter, is at the forefront. The next little tidbit I would say is ask for help. And this is something that I am not afraid to do. I don't think other individuals should be afraid to do. I think sometimes students are afraid to ask their professors for help. They may be afraid to contact other individuals in the field and ask them for help, but I don't think it needs to be. I don't think that that needs to be something that any of us are apologetic for in any way, because if we don't ask one another and we don't share in that resource, right, be a giver, not a taker, it's, what are we all doing this for? What is the purpose in what we do here? The last one seems simple, but I think it's a step that a lot of people forget all the time, which is don't wait, start now. When one is putting themselves out there, we in the arts in particular, there are not going to be people instantaneously knocking on our door, asking us for everything that we do. We have to be our own best advocates. And so some of the things that we're going to be discussing today, or I'll be talking about today, is how you can advocate for yourself. But one of the steps that we need to make sure that we always take is that we get started at an early age. Part of that is going to be some of the pragmatic sort of approaches of dealing with maybe a resume or a bio or building a website or things along those lines. Other things might not feel as important to you right now while you're going through schooling or even as you're going into the professional world, but it's important that you get all of those things kind of in line, you get everything sort of lined up and ready to go so that when you hit the ground running. So don't wait, please. Okay, so now that we cover some of the do's on ways, appropriate, in my opinion, appropriate ways to put yourself out there, let's cover some of the things that we might not always talk about, but I think are important to discuss. So how not to put yourself out there. So if we've already covered the do's, these would be the do nots. So the first do not is don't be improper. Don't post photos or comments of other people's pages that are irrelevant to them. Don't try to gain attention off of making other people look bad. What goes around will come around. And so I think it's important to make sure that when you are putting yourself out there in any way, it's done so in a professional way and does so that it is representative of who you are. The next one is don't immediately sell. And this happens quite a bit, actually, I think, in our world. When you have an affiliation with a certain organization, I'll use myself for an example. I'm very fortunate to get to play principal call with the Chicago Symphony on a very regular basis. And I'm honored and humbled to do so on any instance that I get to sit on that stage. But I will not name names, and I would never ever name names, but there are many times when people will come to me almost immediately upon meeting me and say, oh, next time you need a saxophonist, let me know. I think that that's probably an immediate sell factor. So I would suggest that you let your body of work speak for itself and not immediately going towards selling one's own self towards that individual. So to go back, again, is sort of like, don't be a giver, not just a taker, and make sure that you have those relationships that are formed based upon caring about one another. This is a really important one of where you, when you meet people, you don't immediately go into business sell tactics of what you can offer for them or what they offer for you. Try to get to know the person first. You would be surprised by how well that actually works. The next one is don't be all about you. Make sure that when you're having conversations, you're getting to know the other individuals. When you're networking with people, it's imperative that you get to know them as well as you want them to know you. Don't immediately make it all about your products or services just because someone's listening to you at that point in time. We need to be more diligent with allowing ourselves to sit back and sort of take in everything around us, take in all of the things around us, let it soak in, and actually listen in some ways. Listen to what people have to say, listen to the feedback that they have to say, and don't just make it simply about what you are. The last one is don't be impersonal. And this goes back to some of the other points, but make sure that when you're connecting with someone regarding business or anything, professional or not, make sure it's always personal and you're not rude to that individual. You'd be surprised by what, you know, what it means to be a nice person in this world, and people that know who you are because they respect you not only in your playing, respect you not only in your teaching, respect you in whatever way that they respect you, but they also know that you're just a good individual to work with. That speaks volumes for many, many people when you're, in particular, when you're sharing the stage with them. Okay, so now that we've kind of covered some of the do's and do nots in the world of networking and in the world of putting oneself out there, I want to start to think a little bit about thinking like an entrepreneur. Now, this is a word that's used a lot. It's become sort of a hotspot for many, many institutions around the world, having entrepreneurial sort of studies, entrepreneurial sort of classes that are being offered, centers for entrepreneurship, and I think it's wonderful, actually. Being a musician in modern day, being a musician right now, part of what we need to do is make sure that we do have an understanding of what it means to go out and be our own best advocate and be an entrepreneur. So these are some things that I think could be beneficial when you're thinking like an entrepreneur. Number one would be think ahead. Where do you see yourself? What's your vision for your future? Entrepreneurs are really good at thinking in the present, but they always have a vision for the future. Now, with that being said, and again, I'll use myself as an example. If you would have asked me 15 years ago if I would be sitting here doing this interview right now, or doing this discussion right now, I would have thought you were kind of crazy because it's not necessarily what I thought I would be doing. I don't know if I thought I would be teaching at the collegiate level. I don't know if I thought I would be performing on the world stage with great orchestras. But what I did know that I was going to be doing was I knew absolutely I was going to be a musician. I knew that my saxophone was my voice. And I knew that those two things could never go away. Now, how I parsed those out and how I actually went about them and where my career has taken me since there has kind of been a journey along the way. I thought I wanted to be a band director and just teach at the high school level. And I really had to sort of ask myself if that's what I wanted to do and be okay with the fact that after a while it wasn't. And so I needed to make sure that I was always forward thinking about what the next steps were. The next one is working across disciplines. And this is something that I think has been very beneficial in my own career and careers of others that I see out there, the Connie Frigos of the world, the Kristen McKeons of the world, individuals that have gone through and actually worked in many different disciplines and have this sort of pendulum between performer, teacher, artist advocate, administrator, music industry, all of these things. Everything is very interwoven with one another. So learning and working across those disciplines, I think, is extraordinarily entrepreneurial. And I think if you can be thinking about broader pictures and impacts of your work, you can see opportunities that might not seem so obvious at the time. But you're going to figure out ways that once those opportunities arise, you're able to actually utilize those for your own benefit. You're able to actually utilize those in your own way of expanding your career, expanding your livelihood, expanding everything that you're doing. With that, I think developing transferable skills are really, really key. I wish in every instance of under the sun, I would have done more marketing classes, more business admin classes, courses outside of music and just learning my craft. Now, I'm not in any way discounting everything that I did to learn how to play the saxophone and to teach and to be a great musician and to learn how to use my ears and my eyes appropriately. But I think skills that I noticed myself using beyond those skill sets that don't necessarily always differentiate us from one another is these transferable skills that I can use in every aspect of my life. So think about skills that you know, could be like as a developer or a marketer or a salesman or accountant. Those are all things that are transferable into your own performance life and into your own teaching life, into your own administrative life, whatever it may be. These are skills that I think we as musicians sometimes forget are as important as what they really are when you get out in the real world. Unfortunately, we all have to pay our bills. Unfortunately, we have to know how to balance our checkbook. Unfortunately, we have to do all of these things. But fortunately, you have an opportunity to make sure that they can transfer then, once you learn about these ideas, that they can transfer into your own performance life. They can transfer into your own professional life. So think about developing those. The next thing is probably one of the biggest, if not the largest thing that I could ever talk about. And I could have covered an entire hour probably just speaking on meeting people and networking with people. Your network of individuals will ultimately bring you so much to the table. My network of individuals include people like Nathan Nab. So when Nathan Nab was, you know, developing this online series, I jumped in an opportunity to be involved with it because I know Nathan, I know his body of work, and I wanted to be involved with something like this. My network included, way back when, people like John Brussier at the Chicago Symphony. And John Bruce, because I got to know him when I was working at Van Doren, I was able to utilize and be able to, for him to know who I was and for him to be able to then in turn make recommendations on my behalf, what unbeknownst to me, were super important in my career. That network of people is your teachers, it's your friends, it's the people you're currently going to school with, it's the people that you meet at saxophone conferences, it's the individuals who ultimately will send students your way if you're looking for private students. It's the individuals who know that they can count on you because you're a good person, because you're a great musician, and because you will bring a lot to the table. So that meeting of individuals is really important. So don't forget to get out of the practice room and actually introduce yourself to people. Take it upon yourself now to introduce yourself to someone that you might not have ever done so. We're all doing these virtual hangouts right now. Get to know somebody that you maybe is living across the country. Challenge yourself to get to know some new people because we all have just a little bit more time now. You're welcome to contact me. I'm happy to get to know you if I don't already know you. Mentors. I can't say enough about this sort of perk as well. And so of course this involves your network. This is part of your networking, but your mentors are kind of at a different level in my mind. I think mentors are individuals that help us on those day-to-days. They're the people that you can call when you have an issue. They're the people that you know you can count on if you just need a little bit of advice on your own career, maybe looking over some of your materials, maybe listening to sound samples as you're going and auditioning for X, Y, and Z. They're individuals who are the ones that you call when you just need a little bit of help, maybe even in your own personal life. These mentors are very, very key. I personally take this very to heart with my own students. Being a mentor to them is probably one of the greatest gifts that I know of, actually. It's something that I take very seriously because I know how strong my mentors, the John Sampins and the Marilyn Trudes and the Deborah Rickmeyers and the Fred Hempkes, and these people were to me that I could call them up and ask them questions and see what they thought of it. With that being said, they're offering you feedback on what their own thoughts are, and you ultimately need to be able to make those decisions and figure out what is right for you. So thinking about where you want to be and why you want to be there, and it might not be the same as them, and that's okay, actually. I think that's really good in some ways. The last one is just be in charge of your own destiny. You ultimately have the power and the understanding of what is best for you. Entrepreneurs are normally agile and adaptable, right? They work around issues, finding new ways to figure out ways to make them work. We're all having to figure things out now. We're all having to figure out new ways to do things now. This is part of what it's about, is part of being agile enough to say, okay, well, we can't all be in the same room together, so what do? Well, we do it online. We figure this out together. Students need to have that kind of same flexibility working towards a goal, and I think that that's a really important factor in kind of putting yourself out there and thinking more like an entrepreneur. So how do we sort of spread the word as an entrepreneur? What are some of the things that we can be doing now? I just told you need to be doing things at this moment. So here are some things that I think we can all be doing during this time of quarantine, as we're all sort of at home in our pajamas. I'm not gonna lie, I will be the first to admit I do have pajamas pants on right now. You're welcome for that information. What can I be doing while I'm sitting around in my PJs and figuring out what the next steps are? So here's some things that I can be doing. These are some things that you can be doing as well. First thing, network. Make sure you're engaging your own network, finding new people to network with, talking to new people. We just had the saxophone conference, the NASA conference. I mean, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it wasn't even 6 weeks ago at this point. And that's such an important factor and a way to network with other individuals. But there's many other opportunities to do so. Introducing yourselves after our concert if you've enjoyed something. Listening to a recording and contacting Tim McAllister to say, hey man, I really love that recording that you just did with St. Louis Symphony. I think that is so fantastic. Those are really simple ways to just kind of say hey and keep in people's minds and let them know that you do think of them and you do think highly of them. I think that's important. Another way, websites, right? And we're going to cover a little bit of specifics on websiting, yes. On websites here in a second, but websites are really important. Social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, what are the kids using now? Snapchat, the TikTok thing, I don't understand that. Even platforms like YouTube and things along those lines. Making sure that your persona out in the world is done so in a way that you can be really proud of. Social media, right? It's just what we all do now. Business cards. Don't forget the importance of a business card. It's nice to be able to hand something. Disney calls them tangible memories. It's something that you can hand to an individual and they then have a memory of you because you might have a picture on it. It might be something that catches their eye. It's just something that they actually tangibly can hold and remember you from. It may go in the trash. That's okay. But having a business card, in particular when you're going to conferences and things along those lines, can always be a nice thing to have. Updated resumes and CVs. We're going to cover some of the things on resumes and CVs just here in a second, but making sure that they're updated. Headshots. Make sure they're up to date. If it doesn't look like you, it's not you anymore. So make sure that you have nice, clean headshots. So if you're proving yourself or you're putting yourself out there, that it's done in a very clear and directed way. You might want to think about doing a press kit. If you're going for that kind of realm of performing, then making sure that your press kit is up to date, making sure that it's downloadable, it's on your website, it's clear and clean, and people can get a hold of it whenever they want. Recordings and videos. We all have the ability to do this now. There are so many platforms to be able to do this, and there's so many ways of actually making sure that our recordings and videos are being placed out into the world. And it's not being done to show off as much as it is to show your skill sets. So just make sure that you have those up to date and that you're keeping all of those in check. Okay, so now let's get to some of the nitty gritty. These are really important things. Resumes, CVs, stands for curriculum vitae, and your biographies, your bios, are really important ways to make sure that you have these things up to date and that you have this information readily available. So if you are applying for a job, if you are going out into the marketplace, if you're looking to do performances, whatever it may be, you have the information there readily available for the individuals that you're putting them for. Okay, so these are some of my suggestions of things that I think are important to include. And this is for any of them, actually, resume, a curriculum vitae, or a bio. I think the most important things that all of us need to make sure that we're including are education. Where do we go to school? Who did you study with? I think that that's a really nice way. It not only allows you to be saying, here's what I've done and I'm proud of this, but also then says, this individual was involved in my life, because we all may know that individual. So that could be an important factor as well. Teaching. Some of you might be saying, well, I haven't taught yet. Then go teach. Make it work. Make it happen. There's no reason you can't. So teaching and what you have done to educate can be very important. Select performances. You might want to list out some performances. Now, if you're going into grad school, you maybe don't need to list your junior high performances. If you're going out of grad school, perhaps it's not even important to have anything from high school in there. So as you're kind of gaining more experience, making sure that those selected performances are very applicable to where you currently are, and that they help us, individuals that may be looking at them or whomever may be looking at them, help them understand more about you, not just a smattering of every single thing. Related experience. I think this is also extraordinarily important. Related experience could be things, if you're applying for certain positions, that you want to show that you've worn administrative hats before. If you want to show that you have budgetary experiences, that you have an understanding of how to recruit, you have an understanding of what it means to build a band program, what it means to build a saxophone studio. Those related experiences can be really beneficial to make sure that you list out there. And the last one on the items that I think are really important to include are professional affiliations. These are your North American Saxophone Alliances. These are your MTNAs. These are being involved with, if you're in the state of Ohio, the Ohio Music Educators, if you're going to be out teaching, or Illinois Music Education, if you're in Illinois, or Florida Music Educator, whatever it may be. Make sure that those professional affiliations are a part of yours. Now, to go back to make sure that you are actually a part of them if you're going to claim to actually have an affiliation with them. So make sure that you are paying your dues, make sure that you're involved in that organization, you're attending the conferences. Don't just list it just for fun. Make sure that it actually is part of who you are and what you do. Some other things that I think might be imperative to include, depending on what you're actually going for, would be some of the teachers that you've worked with potentially. In particular, if you've worked with other teachers beyond just the individuals that are actually teaching at that college. Those could be also very beneficial to just sort of see who else you're involved with in some way. Major performances. This could potentially even be categorized. So this would be, if you're doing more of a CV, a curriculum vitae, where you're spelling out many more of the things that we in the academic realm, in academia, tend more towards these CVs, because we want to have much more information about everything. We can really dive in. Who was conducting? What were the performances? Where were they? What venues were you in? Things along those lines can be very important in those. Might not be as beneficial if you're just writing a short resume, applying for something else. But if you are applying for that academic realm job, I think that's a really important part of it. Again, related experiences, recordings that maybe you have done, and any awards that you've won. If you've won anything along the way, perhaps if you're in an undergrad or graduate school and you've won the concerto competition, that might be important to put for a little while as part of what you've done and something that you can actually showcase. So here's some things to consider. And I think that this is just, there's many young students in particular that don't start actually building these resumes or building a bio because they're scared of what it's going to look like. They've only graduated from high school. They've only taken, professional lessons or lessons with professional for a couple of years. And what do I do here? Okay, well, if you start now and actually begin the process of building your bio and building your resume. And this is maybe the biggest key that I can offer in some ways, is that you can actually start to fill in some of your gaps. So I was working with a graduate student just the other day, and we were talking specifically about this. If you list everything out and you start to build that resume and you notice and you say, well, wait, no, Michael said to do this. That doesn't make sense. I don't have any of that. Well, that's when you can actually take a look at it and say to yourself, okay, well, how can I actually garner that experience? What can I do now to actually make sure that I have the experience necessary for myself, whatever job I may be actually applying for at that point in time. So those gaps are, or at least looking at the resume and then seeing what you have can actually then lead you towards what you need. And those are in some ways the most powerful part of it, to make sure that you're actually very diligent about filling those in along the way. The next thing is update as you go along. As new things come along, you can start to either take things off the bottom. So the analogy of saying, okay, well now I'm in grad school, maybe I can remove things from when I won the John Philip Sousa Award in high school. Not a knock on the John Philip Sousa Award, that's a wonderful award to win, but maybe at some point in time that can go away from your bio and your resume once you've garnered other experiences along the way. Those are important to do simultaneously of actually making sure that you just keep everything up to date, right? Making sure that every single thing that you do, we all get we all get busy. And sometimes we just sort of forget what we've done. And I can say from experience, it's hard to go back and try to remember every little thing that you've done along the way. So it's, in my opinion, my humble opinion, better to go ahead and just make sure that you're updating as you go. Check to see, and this is a very like OCD thing on my point, but check to see what the printed version looks like. Having served on many committees, having served in many different capacities, when people send their resumes, I always recommend sending them as a PDF, by the way, so that they hopefully will appear correctly on everyone's screen and in every instance. But make sure that when you print them off, that they look the same. That there's no skewing of information, that all the text actually still appears. If you're doing them in color, making sure that the color is still bright and lively. It's really important to take a look at them in that way. It's a very kind of editorial note, but I think that it's something that many people miss. And when you look at resumes that aren't clean and aren't well put together, it can maybe paint a picture that is not the picture that you want it to be. And with that being said, for the same reason, think about the look, tone, feel. So this is very marketing jargon here, but how do you want people, when they first look at your information, what do you want them to think about it? When they're looking at your website for the first time, what are you trying to sell them on? What are you trying to say about yourself? What are you trying to make sure that it looks like? And I think the same holds true for resumes, CVs, and bios. Make sure that there's a clean, clear directive. If you're writing a bio and you're sending a CV along with something in a press kit, make sure all the text is the same. Make sure that all of the fonts and everything looks the same so that there's a commonality between them. That's look, tone, feel. And then the last thing is, and this is something that I think people can sometimes also forget, is modify your resume, your job, or your bio or your CV to be job specific. This isn't hard, actually. If you have everything done in those clear sort of delineated different categories, so let's say education and teaching and things along those lines. So if I'm applying for a position that is primarily performance-based, I might move my teaching down further into my resume or my CV. I might not put it at the top of my bio. I might move it down into the bottom of my bio. Still want it to be there, but I can actually just sort of maneuver it based upon the job that I'm actually applying for. You'd be surprised by how many people send resumes and bios and CVs, and it doesn't actually match the job description itself. So if you're going to be applying for something, make sure that those things are very clear and that it's all very specific to that, that job. Okay, so now we're going to move on to websites, and this is also a huge conversation. I'm not using any, I thought about using my own website. You're welcome to kind of take a look at it, but I didn't want this to be specific to me. But these are things that I think are important to consider. These are things that I thought about myself when building a website, and I've had multiple iterations thereof. When I've been involved with building websites for other organizations and other individuals, when I've looked them over for them, So one of the things is ask yourself, what is the purpose? What am I trying to portray? Who is my audience? And that, I think, will help lead you towards making sure that it's very clean and clear as to who you are. If you're going to say that I'm a professional saxophonist, make sure that your website shows that. If you're going to say that I'm a highly regarded teacher, great, that's wonderful. Make sure that your website shows that. And so make sure that it's very clean in that way. Keep the content updated. This isn't always easy. I don't think many of us have web designers that are doing, and webmasters that are constantly, doing these sort of things for us. There probably are some people, but many of us have to kind of do it on our own. So make sure that the content on your website is up to date. Keep things non-cluttered. Do not clutter a website. You can lose an audience really, really quickly by having a cluttered website. You want it to be clean, you want it to be clear, and you want to make sure that you're, again, portraying yourself in that way. Keep away from Flash websites. This is not as much of an issue anymore, but the use of Flash, the unfortunate thing with it for many, many years, unless it's changed, is that the text within the website that's embedded within the website is non-searchable. We want everything that we have to be searchable so that when people put in keywords, they should be able to find us. I hope if somebody puts in CCPA and my last name, they can find me. That's because it's not built in a Flash, sort of domain. So make sure you add your website to search engines. It's very easy to do nowadays. You just have to make sure that you can go to any of the major search engines like Google, and just make sure that it's added and embedded within there. Again, not as much of an issue anymore because there are so many people using different platforms now, but we have moved to a very mobile age where everyone has iPads or some sort of tablet, where they have smartphones, and they're utilizing those to look up information very quickly. So make sure that your website is also available in mobile format in some way. Most web domains now offer that as an immediate. You may have to actually put text in multiple times to make sure that it appears appropriately on the different platforms, but you'll want to make sure that it does appear correctly on mobile devices in whatever way that it can. And the last one is, and just as a kind of a note, is to make sure you use some sort of like Google Analytics or a similar program to track the traffic on your website. That can be a really imperative thing to just sort of take a look at. And number one, where are people looking? How are they finding me? What are the keywords that they're using to find me? I think you'll probably notice one of the former comments, which is networking. I think you'll notice that people actually start to find you through various sources with your name being associated with someone else's. So that can be a really powerful thing to say, oh, wow, maybe I should be playing that up a little bit more. Maybe I wasn't looking at it the same way. Where are they clicking from? And the other thing is, how long are they spending on the pages? If you notice that your website, no one is ever clicking on a certain page, do you need it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it could be something that you could ask yourself to sort of figure out, is that really an important part of my website? Or can I redo that in some way to actually make more sense of it for my audience? Okay. That's a lot of information. So I'm going to switch over now because I see there's a lot of people here. I put my contact information on there and some of my social media handles. And you're welcome to add me and ask questions along the way if you'd like to do so. But I wanted to kind of wrap up by seeing if there are any questions. I'm going to move over to that. So I'm going to open the floor up now to questions that anyone may have. So let's see. Nate, are you still there as well?
I am here.
Awesome. Well,
so the first one is from Samuel, and he says, what exactly is a press kit? So go into like the contents of a press kit form.
Yeah, so press kits are utilized. We in the saxophone community probably don't use those as regularly, but a press kit would have all of the various things that we were talking about, all the component pieces. So it would be more than likely would have your resume, some type of overall cover letter that just says who you are and what you do. The other thing that would also make sure it entails is up-to-date headshots. Singers tend to use press kits a lot, in particular Broadway singers and people along those lines. But we also can have press kits to just, if you're working with an agency, an organization, it may be a performance venue, they may ask you to actually provide that information. So it'd be resume, bio, kind of a cover letter that kind of showcases who you are, what you do. And it may also, I know some people have gone so far to actually set rates for performances and things along those lines. So it may actually have some of your rates and things along those lines in there as well.
Yeah, good. And Andrew just had a comment, saying he really liked the idea of using the resume as a tool for self-assessment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those things that I sort of had to figure out along the way, actually, is that I noticed myself sort of having questions with my own self of, okay, my resume doesn't look good. So what do I do with this? Instead of actually asking myself a different question, which was, okay, my resume isn't complete. What can I add to it? And how do I need to garner that experience so that I can actually add those things to my own resume? And part of it was just actually taking a look at other people's resumes, looking at those who I actually really respected in the field and kind of idolized in a way of like, oh, I would love to do that at some point in time. How did they get there? And sort of asking myself along the way, okay, well, what can I do to start to fill in my own gaps along the way?
Yeah. And so I got a text from a couple of different folks with two questions for you, which was one of them, which was, would you be willing to share your PowerPoint?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I have the PowerPoint that I showcased, and then I also have the one with more notes on it. I'm happy to share the one with more notes on it that actually has a little bit more detail.
Awesome.
Sure.
And are you willing to share your CV or resume? Do you post that on your website?
I'm happy to. I actually I try to practice what I preach, which is that I actually have multiple iterations of my CV. I have kind of my long scoping one, kind of like a long bio. I know you and I were talking about this yesterday. I have sort of like different iterations of my own biography, depending. Right. There are some times when they'll say, okay, we only want 200 words. We only want this. We want the long one. So I kind of have different ones of that, but same with my CV. I have the long one that has everything, and then I have one that is more of my administrative background. If I'm looking at a position like that, I have one because I do so much orchestral playing now. I have one that is specifically geared towards all my orchestral playing. So absolutely, I'm happy to share. I'll just share the long one.
Cool. Yeah, and conference programs often want a much shorter bio, like a couple of sentences.
Yeah, and some of us, yeah, yes.
If you only have a 400-word bio, narrowing that down can sometimes be tough.
Yeah, and it's always interesting too. I mean, having been involved with the saxophone organization many times, it's always interesting those who come back and say, well, there's no way I can do it in 200 words. And, there's no way that, well, I guess you can. You just need to boil it way down and say what you need to be succinct in that way. And so it can be a little bit of a dilemma with yourself to say, okay, what am I really trying to say here? But I think there's many times when conference bios in particular have to be very, very short.
Right. And so Andrew asked as a follow-up to the self-assessment for the resume, like, how can we effectively represent soft skills on our resumes in a convincing way?
What exactly does he mean by soft skills? Does he say?
He doesn't say. I mean, Andrew, you can certainly comment in there if you want, but I mean, I think maybe skills, a lot of times you'll see, that skills that are maybe outside of directly like teaching, or performances, he just said like work ethic, organization, skills developed from work as a TA, etc.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there's two different schools of thought on this. I think number one is you can embed them somehow within your own resume or within your own CV. However, I think maybe in some ways those are things that could be covered in a cover letter. Those are things that could actually be talked about in a different way that might not be as applicable within there. However, if it is something, again, if you're, let's say your first position is administrative and then you're going to be teaching a little bit and you need to show some of those admin skills and you have a background, doing budgeting, if you have a background doing some sort of customer service, I mean, I tell you what, I mean, my first jobs, in high school were waiting tables and, working at Lowe's and working with people in that, and I have utmost respect for those individuals that do. But I think I learned a lot about just kind of speaking with individuals. And so I think my first probably iterations of bios and resumes included that I was good with people somehow. So I think you can embed them. It might just be a little bit more applicable based upon, and Andrew, you're welcome to, contact me directly if you need some help with this kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess on a follow up to that, what are your thoughts on like what to put in a resume versus what to put in a CV versus what to put in a cover letter? Like a lot of times, folks' cover letters will read like a prose form of a CV.
Yeah. So to me, and just having been on the administrative sides, particularly looking for search committees and things along those lines, if you're talking at the academic realm, but I think this is kind of applicable throughout. I think the cover letter is what is getting your foot in the door. You need to be showcasing at the highest level who you are, what you've done, and making sure that no matter what, they open it to that next page to actually read your resume or CV, whatever they're asking for. So I think the cover letter is in many ways extraordinarily important to make sure that you're showcasing the largest global scale kind of things, keywords, individuals that you've worked with, ways that they can recognize something. Not every person that sits as an FYI. Most of the time, if not all of the time, when you're applying for the jobs, you will be the only person that will be a specialist on that actual instrument, right? And Nate, you know this, you've sat on these kind of committees. You're not searching for multiple saxophone professors at the same institution. So you need to be gearing these more towards individuals that are outside of the saxophone realm and spelling out what you've done within the global scale of music. So I think the cover letter itself can be very important for that. And I think that the resume and the CV, depending on which route you're taking, and again, they're similar. The CV is just a much more in-depth kind of version of a resume. The resume itself should just be spelling out, within in a few sort of succinct pages. I don't personally put like it can only be 1 page or 2 page kind of thing on it, but I do think it just needs to be very applicable to what you're applying for. CV is much more in-depth.
Right. Yeah, great. And this is one from Nick. He said, what were some of the experiences and skills that you think helped you make a great candidate for your first music business job?
Oh, Lord. I think I'll go back to some of the things I was talking about at the onset, which is that I presented myself as me. I wasn't trying to be anything other than that. I was sort of unapologetically me, but done in a way that was professional and well-spoken and well put together. But I wasn't trying to sell them on anything other than that. So I was fortunate to, because there is also part of all of this that is right time, right place kind of situation, but it was right time, right place, but I also had all of my materials ready to go at that very moment. And so it happened very quickly, and that was with Van Doren. And honestly, quite frankly, when I first started with Van Doren, I was literally working part-time, filling read orders. That's how it started for me. I just knew that it was like, I saw Van Doren, I used Van Doren, it made sense. I was young, I needed something, that I thought was kind of within the realm of possibilities. And so I applied, and ultimately that ended up changing into something else once they started to see actually my skill sets at that point. So I would say to Nick that, part of it is just kind of reaching out to people and seeing if there's experiences that can be done, whether it's being paid or not. It might have to be a volunteer sort of thing, but it starts to build you in their pipeline. And once they see that you're good at certain things, you never know where that's going to lead you actually.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Great. And then one final one, which is, how do you prepare your orchestral rep when you're gonna play a concert? What do you do to prepare?
Okay, so there's a lot of things that I do. Number one is I make sure that I have the absolute best set of reads that I possibly can. Because you never know how that concert hall, in particular when you're walking out of a concert hall for the very first time, you need to make sure that, because there are times when you won't even have rehearsals. I'll give you an example of that. I played at Carnegie Hall back in November with Chicago Symphony. I had 0 rehearsals with them. I had 0 warm-up with them. I walked in and played the concert. So I had to know that my read was exactly where it needed to be. And I had to be able to trust myself enough to know that that was going to happen. During the performance, of course, you have to keep your eyes and ears and everything just spot on at all given moments. But the preparation really came from making sure that I was practicing and knowing what the intonation of the orchestra was going to be. Do they tune at 442? Do they tune at 444? Do they fall somewhere in between there? I need to know that score like the back of my hand, probably better than I've ever prepared anything else, so that I know every little nuance of what's happening. And I think one of the things that, in particular with orchestral playing, that I think a lot of people forget is, although you may be a soloist at times, and actually every time you play, you're basically a soloist, you're not a concerto soloist. It's not about you, it's about the whole. And so being a part of that organism and being a part of that ensemble and within the realm of things, how do I fit into that? Am I following brass? Do I need to try to mimic the sound and articulation that they're using? Am I actually with the string players at this point? Am I playing with the cellos? I watch their arms to make sure that I'm dead on with them. You know, how, and no matter what, your eyes are glued to that conductor, period.
Yeah.
So those are, I mean, I guess the preparation really comes from knowing the score like the back of my hand. I do score study like crazy, even if I've played it before. I always ask for a copy of the part, even if I've played it 8,000 times, to make sure I have the exact edition that they're playing, because they're all multiple editions, and then make sure I know exactly what intonation level they're using.
Right. No, that's yeah, totally. I get it.
You definitely get it, Nate. We've sat next to each other many times. So.
And the part, the addition thing is really critical.
Yeah.
Especially something like Romeo and Juliet, depending on what suite they're using or which movements from which suites. A lot of times those are all mixed in. So
yeah,
knowing exactly which.
I literally played. This was maybe 3 years ago. I played Romeo and Juliet with Chicago Symphony, Michael Tilson-Thomas conducting. The very next week, I turned around and left 2 days after the last performance and flew to Cleveland and played with the Cleveland Orchestra with Franz conducting. Completely different. Completely different. And they weren't, I mean, I just made sure, and they were both Romeo and Juliet, but they were completely different editions. They were completely different suites. So you really have to make sure that you verify and check it.
Yeah. All right. We got one more question from Evan here, which is, can you briefly discuss what you do to prepare for interviews?
I practice. I do mock interviews with people. I'll ask friends to say, hey, you know, I'm applying for this job. This is the job description. This is the information that I've sent in. Can you ask me some questions? I'm fortunate in my life to have individuals who I trust to be able to do those kind of things with. I'm also fortunate that I haven't had to apply for a job in a little while, but I think mock interviewing can be very good. You need to put yourself in situations that make you a little uncomfortable, actually, and interviews can be slightly uncomfortable. But you know, the part of all of that is just, again, just making sure that you're you during that whole process. When I go in for interview, and I try to still be me. I still have my voice and the way that I present myself. I want it to be very much who I am. I always make sure that I have additional copies, even if I don't hand them out. I don't even offer them unless people ask for them. I have additional copies of resumes or CVs if that's what they've asked for. Materials, just in case they don't have them with them. I always have business cards with me so that I can hand them to at the end. I try to get a feel for the room. If it feels like that's not the right time to be handing out, you know, things at the end, I don't do it, but at least I have everything there with me. And just like a performance, I try to think it through in the way that I do a performance. I know I'm going to bow at the end of this performance. Okay, what am I going to do at the end of my interview? Am I going to shake hands with everyone? Am I going to greet them? I make sure I know who their names are, a little bit about them, so I can try to relate to them. Oh, you're a Bowling Green alum, me too, or you're a University of Illinois alum, or whatever it may be. Those can be really kind of practical interviewing tips too, I think.
Yeah, great, absolutely. Roy says hi, and it was wonderful to meet you at the biennial.
Hey, Roy.
Down to join us. But that is it, Michael. There are no other questions. Thanks so much for all the info, and we'll be in touch about the PowerPoint and your CVs and all that.
Sounds good. And anyone who's watching now and or watching afterward, if you have any questions, like I said, my information was on that last slide. If you want to send me an email or even just put comments in the discussion of this group right here, I'm happy to help people along the way. So,
all right. Well, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right.
Stay safe, everyone.